So we're here to announce a new product that we've been working on for probably close to a year now. And the sort of genesis of this product is really answering the question of, how do we go from dozens of anchors to hundreds of anchors to thousands of anchors on the network as quickly as possible. And because anchors are sort of critical to the growth, access of users on the network. And we'll talk about why they're important and how we're going to get there throughout today. And Jake's going to walk us through what we've built and how easy it is to deploy and run. And then we'll close out and talk about what the future of the platform itself will look like going forward. So I think it's always important to start with a level set, which is what is an anchor? Because we've used that term sort of in different ways throughout the history of the network. So with all the new people joining, and the variants in the audience, I figure it's worthwhile to level set with exactly what we mean by an anchor. So basically, at its most basic level, an anchor is a bridge. They have value on two different networks. So either a wallet on Stellar and then access to a payment network, and they facilitate transactions across those networks. You and I all probably have access to a bank account or cash in your wallet and maybe a Stellar account as well. Doesn't make you an anchor. What makes you an anchor is offering that as a service to others. So being willing to accept a payment on one network and make a payment on another, say taking a bank transfer and then willing to transfer cash or cash equivalent on Stellar, makes you an anchor, offering that as a service to others.
He's got the magic touch.
So, anchors tend to be sort of market or network specific. So they are either focused on specific payment instruments, like cash in, for example, with MoneyGram, or specific markets, like Settle, focuses on Latin America. But together, they create a sort of patchwork of access using a standard set of interfaces that, empower or enable this reach for the global network. I swear it's just me. Let's see if I can remember. There it is. All right. And so together, that capability makes it possible for a daughter to send money home to her father by making a payment with a debit card in one transaction or one currency, and receiving it in another. Let's just see if I go over here. It works. Nope. Okay. Anyway, I could just speak to these. So what's important about these applications, these networks, is that they make it possible not only for end users to do these transactions, but also for developers, right? So these interfaces that they make available allow developers to build truly global applications. So you can do pay in, pay out, which is, if you've ever built one of these applications before, you know that accepting payments is not the hard part. It's actually paying out to users that's the hard part, across like a diverse set of payment networks, payment methods, currencies, all of those things. And this is important not because of what it will enable you to do if you're building an application in, say, Silicon Valley, right? Yes, you can build the same types of tools. We can make it possible for Uber or Airbnb or some of these other organizations to expand out globally. And that's important. But what's really important, I think what is really the interesting value that this network of anchors will make possible is that those next versions of those applications will be able to be built in the markets in which they're connected. So, you can build the next Uber You don't need to be in Silicon Valley. You don't need to have a scaled up piece of infrastructure that you're using and starting with in the Bay Area or some of these other places. You'll be able to build them out in the local markets that you're looking to serve. And that's our hope with the Anchor Network, and I think that's what we'll be able to enable. Ladder. Where's the laptop? Okay. All right. So that's the opportunity. Those are the sort of benefits. Let's talk about what some of the challenges are. So starting off with who should be an anchor on the network, right? So what we've seen as the network has changed over time, we've started to see some best practices, some examples of folks who've become successful, and they sort of have these common traits. And those common traits are that they have an existing business in these markets, right? So they're bringing expertise in these markets to the network itself, right? So they've got existing connections to local payment rails. They've got existing licenses or regulatory clarity. They've got service interfaces that they've already built that are serving real customers today. And so what you can think of them as is organizations which are adding connections to the Stellar network as a new source of revenue, new driver for an existing business that they already have. And it seems to work fairly well for them. And so what's the challenge, right? So the challenge is that, if you've ever built a business like this or worked in a business like this, when we ask you to connect to the Stellar network, we ask you to do two really important things. One is, build a new payment rail, new infrastructure to connect, to accept those payments on the Stellar network. And the other is to stand up these standard API interfaces. And the challenge with that is that, if you've built one of these businesses, you've spent probably years refining and perfecting your interfaces, whether it's your website, whether it's your API infrastructure, to exactly tailor and fit to your customers' needs. And so then we come along and say, well, you need to do these other interfaces, which are probably not as good as yours because they're common across the entire world. They're not going to be perfect suited or perfect fit for the use case that you've already built. And so we're asking you to come in and build infrastructure to an implementation standard of something that you've never seen before on infrastructure you're unfamiliar with. And many times it'll be your team's first exposure to building something with the blockchain. And so that presents a challenge. And all of that means that, when you're evaluating doing something like this, it's making that business case to do it all that more challenging. And so what we tried to do is fulfill the promise that we think this opportunity can present, which is that, there are three critical components of this. One is that, there's a network-driven demand generation that happens here. So one of the interesting attributes of being an anchor is that you can drive demand for your business by essentially having it resold by all the applications out there that connect to it. So, an application connects to your anchor service and recruits users. They just send them sort of seamlessly to your site to onboard and use your service. You don't have to go out and acquire those customers because the applications are doing the acquisition on your behalf. If we can maximize the reuse of your existing infrastructure and capabilities, it means there's less for you to build, less overhead costs for you. And if we can do all of that with low costs of the transactions facilitated by the network itself, you can get a great margin out of that business because you don't have any acquisition costs, your operational costs flow through your existing infrastructure, and the supply chain costs of the transaction facilitation is really low because the transactions are fractions of a penny. And so the real challenge that we have to come across or cover here is, what does it cost for you to set up and get connected, and how fast can we do it? And if we can drive that cost to close to zero, then it becomes a no-brainer to go ahead and build a service like this and connect it to the network. And so that was the the genesis of why we decided to build the Anchor platform. And so I'm going to hand it off to Jake to talk about exactly what that ends up looking like from a technical implementation perspective. I should start here. Actually, it works better over here.
Thanks, Nick. So I just want to start off with a little precursor to what the Anchor platform is trying to do. So when I joined the Stellar Development Foundation in 2019, we had a problem. We had these standardized APIs, and we expected everybody to build, a stack that complied with that API, and nobody really knew how to do it. Everybody was doing it for the first time. So I wrote this piece of software called Polaris. And Polaris is a Python framework that effectively is the precursor to the Anchor platform. It allows you to integrate into this framework, and it exposes these SEP APIs. But there was a problem with that, and the problem was that it was specific to Python. So if you didn't know how to use Python, or if you didn't want to use Python, then you were kind of out of luck. You had to write your implementation from scratch. And using Polaris wasn't super simple either. There was a lot of nuance to the implementation, the interface, and the business case that Nick described that Polaris was solving was kind of inhibited. It presented a roadblock to actually being able to use that technology and have the solution you're trying to utilize. So we created the Anchor platform, and we designed it specifically with lessons learned from Polaris. So the whole idea behind the Anchor platform is to make connecting to Stellar as simple as possible. It exposes a simple API internally to the organization running the Anchor platform, and exposes the SEP APIs that some of you are probably familiar with externally to the Stellar ecosystem. One of the core things that we wanted to make sure were possible is that it was completely configurable. So adding a new SEP or using different combinations of SEPs in your service is completely feasible. This is not specific to SEP 31, our cross-border payment standard. It's not specific to SEP 12 or SEP 10, our KYC or authentication standards. It's completely composable. And it's configurable not just in the SEPs that you run, but the assets that you use, the custodial services you use, and I'll get a little bit more into that in a second. And then finally, we also wanted to make sure that it was extremely easy to run. This is something that we often ran into with Polaris, is that you had to be familiar with the inner workings of the application in order to know what was going on. If you ran into problems, you had to be able to kind of debug the system, the software that you didn't write. So the interface that we provided you guys to run this Anchor didn't really help. Didn't really meet you guys halfway in running this service. And so we really wanted to make it sure that when you use this product, that it worked for you and not just your users, but your developers were familiar, comfortable, and confident using this technology. This is difficult. There it goes. Okay, so the whole idea behind the Anchor platform is that it does the heavy lifting for you. The Anchor platform's goal is to minimize the development effort on your end and maximize the compatibility that you get with the rest of the Stellar ecosystem. So as I mentioned earlier, it implements the SEP APIs, and we'll detail the roadmap at the end of this presentation. But it also connects to the Stellar network. So if you run the Anchor platform, you don't have to submit transactions to the network. The Anchor platform does that for you. You don't have to listen to the network because the Anchor platform does that for you. It also implements or supports third-party custodians. So for a long time in our first solution in Polaris, you had to host your own keys. That was really the only option you had. And for a lot of businesses, this is a non-starter. So we built the Anchor platform specifically in mind to have a plug and play option with different custodial services. And you don't need to manage your keys. You can if you want to, if you don't want to use a custodial service, but it supported third-party custodians out of the box. See, I'm reading off the slides, so I haven't memorized the content. Okay, So let's talk about how the business actually connects to the Anchor platform, right? Because that previous slide had a architecture diagram that kind of showed the whole system. But really what you guys should care about is how does my business interact with this piece of software? And what do I need to understand about this system? And the entire idea behind this product was that we minimized the amount of effort that you guys need to do to actually use this product. So there's three interfaces really. There's this thing called the callbacks API. This is effectively how the Anchor platform communicates with what we call the business server, this infrastructure that you provide that interacts with the Anchor platform and does what the Anchor platform can't. And we'll dig into what that is in a second. The platform API is how the business server communicates to the Anchor platform. So it's kind of it's an API that the platform itself exposes internally to developers so that you can interact and understand the state of the platform. And then finally, we have this optional component called events. And these are just asynchronous events that occur on the platform side that are exposed in the platform API. So you don't need to use the events. You can pull the platform API and understand the state of the system using that mechanism. But if you want to design a server that is simply receiving requests from the platform, you can actually decide not to use the platform API at all and just consume those events from a queue. So the first one is the callbacks API, and on the right there you'll see the set of endpoints that you need to implement. The first two are fees and rates, and these are actually mutually exclusive. So if you're offering, say, a US dollar to USDC Anchor, then you're going to use fees, or if you're using an Argentinian peso to ARST Anchor, you're going to use the fee endpoint. And this is just to provide the amount that you're charging your end users to facilitate this transaction. The rates endpoint is a little bit, it gives a little bit more information. It's used when you actually have a foreign exchange in your transaction. So if you're accepting Argentinian pesos, but you're providing your users wrapped Bitcoin on Stellar, then this is the endpoint that you guys would implement. And the bulk of the complexity in this API has to just do with the KYC piece. As always, KYC is some of the most complex parts of your application or your onboarding flow. And as we move forward in designing this piece of software and moving it forward to 2.0 and 3.0, we're going to be focusing on this piece here because we really want to, again, limit it and try to minimize the amount of development effort necessary. But right now, this is the endpoints that we're exposing just for retrieving customers, defining customers using the put customer endpoint, and then obviously managing, obviously deleting or simply archiving user data. So the next API is called the platform API. And if I can get to this slide, I'll tell you about it. Okay. So the platform API is pretty simple. It exposes two sets of endpoints. One's on transactions and one's on quotes. And these are really the only pieces of state that the Anchor platform manages. So again, obviously you can decide to use the platform API or you can decide to use the events. It's in either or situation. But if you want to use the platform API, you can use it to fetch the transactions that the Anchor platform has been processing or has processed already. And then this patch transactions endpoint is actually the most important piece of the puzzle here. It's what you'll use to inform the Anchor platform of any off-chain events that it needs to be aware of. So let's say you're facilitating a withdrawal from the Stellar network. You're off-ramping Argentinian peso tokens or wrapped Bitcoin or USDC off the Stellar network, and you're paying your end users out in the fiat in your local jurisdiction. This patch transactions endpoint is going to be used to inform the Anchor platform that you have actually delivered funds to your users, right? This is how the Anchor platform is updated on the off-chain happenings, and the Anchor platform is responsible for all the events on-chain. We also have a quotes endpoint, so if you want to understand the rates that you guys have already been providing, so that rate endpoint that you saw in the callbacks API, those rates are fed into the quotes that are returned to your end users. And you can see the expirations and the management of those quotes. that the Anchor platform is returning to your end users using the quotes APIs. And the final interface is this events interface. So the idea is that the Anchor platform publishes events to a queue to be consumed by your business server. And these events occur using two channels. It either occurs from the Stellar network, so let's say you receive a payment from your users trying to facilitate a withdrawal, or a Stellar application like a wallet initiates a transaction and confirms an exchange rate that you've offered through the Anchor platform. Both of these will initiate events, and they'll be pushed up to either, right now we support AWS SQS and Kafka, and your business can consume those events and then do whatever you want with that information. Again, so the events is just another alternative to using the platform API, aside from that patch transactions endpoint, which has to be utilized to update the state of the Anchor platform. Okay. And the last thing I want to just point out is that the Anchor platform is configured, or is highly configurable. So we really want to make sure that you can change and tune all the knobs to do exactly what you're looking to do. So you define the on-chain and the off-chain assets using a configuration file, and you select the custodian and provide all the credentials for the Anchor platform to access that platform. Or you can self-custody your assets. You can enable any combination of Stellar ecosystem protocols, and you specify exactly what pieces of KYC information you need. And then finally, we want to make sure that you can deploy this in any way you want. So the Anchor platform is implemented in Java. It's a Spring application. If you want to and are familiar with the Java stack, you can run the jar file straight on your machine. We're also publishing Docker images, so you can pull it down from Docker Hub. And in the future, as Nick will elaborate on, we're looking to get this into various cloud provider environments and get as close to a one-click deploy as we can get. So that's all I have on the technical end. I'm going to pass it back to Nick, and he can outline what we're looking to see from the Anchor platform in the future.
Reliability, faster, better than the clicker. That's what we're expecting. Okay, what's next? I'm going to just do one slide. Get up there. Okay, so I'm highlighting about four features here, in a rough order about the ones what we're gonna tackle them. So immediately next step is step 24 will be coming to the platform, similar to step 31 is today. It'll be configurable, deployable. And we'll be adding a suite of different off-the-shelf custody providers, because the vision here is that somebody wants to join and become an anchor for the network. It should be deploying software, configuring it, light integration work to the interfaces that you already have and have been running your business with. And so, the developers at your organization should, know your APIs really well and can bridge those into third parties' software. In fact, you've probably been helping your customers do that, building applications against those APIs for a really long time. So connecting them are pretty straightforward. So you'll be able to pick your custody provider, pick which steps you want to deploy, and as Jake mentioned, in the future you'll be able to pick this application out of the GCP or AWS marketplace. Right now we provide Helm charts for deployments, but it should be one-click deploy from those marketplaces. And then finally, step 6. You can think of this order and this roadmap as being in support of where we're seeing most of the applications that are joining the network right now. So a lot of interest in step 24, driven by people adopting MoneyGram and connecting to the MoneyGram integration. And then the custody piece is that there's lots of folks looking to not manage their own keys anymore. So with that, I'll just say it's live today, so you can go and start playing with it. That's the landing page, the links to the GitHub, all of that stuff is there. And if you want to learn more about it, you should chat with Jake or I, just come grab us. I'm particularly interested if you saw that prioritization, you think step 6 before step 24 is more important. You've got a specific custody provider you'd like us to look at integrating. you got ideas about how it should be packaged, so on and so forth. We'd love to hear from you. Any and all feedback's welcome. Like I said, the GitHub's open, so if you have any issues, please file them. Let us know. We want to help you. We want to get this thing in as many hands as possible. Okay, that's it.